Hello, everybody. We're back again. Um, we're going to try to keep it a little bit shorter than we did last time. Sometimes I get carried away, but it sure takes a long time to download this once we finish. So um, try to keep it shorter. Um, yeah, this time I want to talk a little bit about uh, social structure and personality theory. Um, I want to focus mainly on one of the main features in uh, uh, theoretical constructs within this particular area. One thing I'll point out is with the three different theoretical paradigms we have, all three of them are certainly micro theories, looking at everyday situations, everyday life, up close. Uh, but symbolic interactionist theory, unlike the other two, gives more credence to human agency. And as you've read, human agency is that ability of human beings to uh, affect the world through their own choices. Uh, so, human agency is the ability to make things happen. That one is not just totally determined by the larger social structures of society, whether that be, whether that be the fault lines along racial lines and gender. These are also structural categories in society as well as identities. But race is a structural category, gender, ethnicity, uh, but certainly social class, also the institutions of society. All these are social forces that impact our lives outside of ourselves. Uh, but agency is that ability to say no to things or to say yes. It's the choices that we have in life and that we can move things, that we have the ability to affect our fate, so to speak. Whereas the social structure, personality, and group processes theories tend to, as you may have gleaned from your reading, tend to be structural in nature. And what they're saying is, though they're focusing on the everyday life of individuals, they're saying that there's enough social structural forces that are impinging on people's behaviors, enough so that it tends to make society stable. Uh, so there's more emphasis on how society is structured and that how those social forces actually shape our behavior. And certainly that's the truth as well. All of these have all three of these, just like our macro theories, all three of these micro theories also tell us something about everyday life. No one theory can tell us everything about the macro level of society, and no one theory can tell us about the everyday level uh, society in society. So there is this notion then that when we study all three of these, we get a larger picture of what reality is and what's going on. Uh, they all have their biases. So one of the biases of symbolic interactionism would be that it gives much more weight to individual choices and making meaning and the ability to recreate, change, to socially construct the reality in different ways, even though they are under constraints of social structures. So a good analogy would be, I'm certain you've heard this one. It's like the house has been built, and so we have to live within the framework, the structure of the house, but we can certainly rearrange the furniture like we want, right? So this is the same notion. The individuals we're acting uh, with and against these social forces that tend to shape our behavior, but we have the ability to change our minds. We see this. Well, it talks about it in the chapter that while we may be experiencing the same social structures, how one person internalizes and reacts to that social force on their behavior and it may be different from another individual simply because of their perspectives, their psychology, if you will, personality. It may be different. So just wanted to point this major feature out. Um, but let's look at just a little bit at the social structure personality theory. It's one that I certainly uh, think a lot of, and I think a lot about it. I mean, I think I use it. I also use it in my own research, and it's something that we have to acknowledge, even if we're doing a symbolic interactionist study. It's so useful a notion to focus on people's statuses and how they're and their norms and their roles they're playing. Because you may be in a cultural situation we don't know much about the culture itself, and so yeah, or the people in terms of their you know their behaviors and what things mean. One thing you can focus on is the social statuses they're in. Sometimes it can be quite uh, generalizable. That is, from one person to the next, or one group to the next, in terms of studying. Uh, so, say for example, looking at some statuses that are higher up in the community, and then those statuses in the group that may be of lower status, and you can figure these out over time as you're doing your research. So it's very important to get some sense of the, for example, the power structure in a community. One way is to focus on the social structure. Uh, the way I usually talk about it, I'm just talking about this in a general fashion. I leave the reading and a lot of the all the nuanced concepts that come along that are in the chapter. My thing is just to sort of give you a little of my spiel, so to speak, to give you a little more of the logic of some of these concepts, some of these theories. So for social structure and personality. Uh, and by the way, the personality part uh, is not. I don't really use that so much, but I really focus more on the social structural aspects as I'm more of a symbolic interactionist. But the social structure perspective really helps a lot. So let's take this example. I can sort of sum this up in one sentence, and of course, I don't have a blackboard. I wish I did. Uh, but I'm just going to give you a sentence, then we can talk about it. A social status, you can write this down while I'm talking. I'll go back over it. A social status is a position in a social structure. A status is a position within a social structure in which we enact roles. So if you can write that down in a sentence, a status is a position that we take within a social structure in which we enact roles. Okay, so let's just use the classroom. We could use any example in any situation, uh, but let's use the example of the classroom. Okay, so my status. Let's make it our class if we could see each other. We're in class right now. Uh, so my status in this social structure. Uh, when I was hired on at the university. Before that, I was a graduate student. So at that point, I was in the social structure. My status was as a grad student. Uh, and Before I finished my dissertation, I finished all my classwork. Everything was done. Then I took on what's called the all but dissertation status. That's the ABD status. A lot of students don't really know about this one. It's the toughest one to have to deal with, because at the ABD status, one is no longer seen as a student so much. You're finished with the studies you had to do, your coursework, and so you no longer have any obligations to classes. Your professors pretty much are letting you go out and do your research for a dissertation. You're no longer you kind of feel useless, not needed. You may be still teaching though. You may be as a teaching assistant, so you'll have that status. But it's a long and lonely sort of in between two worlds. You're no longer a student, but you're not really a full-fledged PhD doctor. You're not called doctors yet. So it's sort of in a limbo world, if you will. It can be quite nerve-wracking, actually very stressful. But anyway, in this scenario, as the professor of the class, then once I was hired in, then I've taken on a formal status as the instructor in the class, and so I am. In terms of the social structure of the classroom itself, there is a social structure, and so that there's my status as the professor. Let's say instructor. I'm the instructor of the class. You, as a student, you've laid your money down and you've come to college, university college, and you take up a status. Now, who does these two abstract statuses, the university, uh, professor, instructor, student status, who do they belong to? Do they belong to me? Do they belong to you? No, they don't. We just simply uh, in my case, being hired in to take up that position. And for you, you've laid your money down, and now you're in the student status, where Uh, so at this point, then we have entered into the social structure of professor and students in the classroom. Uh, but so in some sense, this is already determined before we come on the stage. And this really gets at the social aspect of the statuses, is that the statuses belong to the university, and we just come along. They're there before we arrive, and they're there after we leave. So after you finish your college degree, after I retire, somebody else comes in, takes my place. They hire a new person, and when you leave, other students are brought in, and they take up your status. Now you're no longer a student. So it's there before we come on the stage. It's there after. So what we're saying is that it's the educational culture and the institution of education, and then when we want to bring it down, UNCP, it belongs to the university, and they have structured the social structure. It's already there before we get there, and that includes the statuses and the roles and norms that we have to adhere to. So in my status to you, think of it this way. Let's go ahead and look at some of the other. So the social structure is made up of two or more statuses interacting with each other, regardless of the personalities involved. And we'll talk a little bit about that more here in a second. So, regardless of our personalities, the social structure is already the norms and the roles attached to the statuses have already been created, right? They're there already, regardless of my personality or yours. And we'll talk about that again in a second. So that it's already been processed for us. So what do we do as individuals in this situation? Well, this again, we take on the roles of the status. So we have to learn what is let's stay with social expectations. Norms are about social expectations in terms of our behavior, whether it's a verbal behavior or physical, or even our looks can be a part of normative order. So when we take on the roles, what we're saying here is that we're going to conform. So the big word here for us in understanding the social structure and the statuses of professor and student is that my behavior and your behavior is being governed by external norms, right? The norms have already been attached to the role, to the status. That's the roles. The roles are informed by the norms. So for us internally, it's once we take up these positions, it is what's expected of me. A lot of what sociology is about is social expectation. That our pattern society, our ways of everyday life, is governed by social expectations and how we adhere, how we conform to those normative pressures, those expectations. And that's really the bedrock of our society, of a civilized society, or our adherence. Not 100%, because if we were 100% conforming to norms, then we would be robots, right? We would be what they call yes people, right? We'd be saying yes to everything, going along with everything. But we know we don't do that. We deviate. And that's for a different chapter. Um, so so let's set up the scenario then. So you guys are in the class and I'm teaching. Now what am I doing? Here's a couple other ideas to think about. In terms of those norms that govern our statuses, it's based on rights and obligations. So the normative expectations are based on rights and your rights and expectations. So you have your rights, I have my rights, right? And then you have your rights, and then it's a two-way street, two-way street. So much so that uh, if I didn't know any of your names in the class, and you didn't know me, we could still do the class without any problem if we conform our behavior to what's expected. Now we don't come into that situation, especially at the university level or even high school. Really, we don't come into this blindfolded, because we've been socialized since we were little kids in classroom behaviors. Your rights and your obligations. We each have norms that are governing our behavior. What are my rights as a student? What are my obligations as a student? And that has been drilled in us since first grade, right? And Lord, bless those elementary school teachers that try to take us on as kids. I kind of joke about it a lot because, yeah, kids are kind of tough to have to socialize. But man, well, in my own experience, high school students were maybe even worse. You know, in terms of trying to get high school students to behave themselves and to take their high school seriously. Not saying you didn't, but you know what I'm talking about. It's not like a bunch of robots walking around just saying, doing exactly what they're supposed to do. So it's a lifelong learning process, basically. By the time we get to university, we're expected to be adults. We're paying money to be there, and we're expected to really adhere to our rights and our obligations in the classroom. But we still have troublemakers in college too. We have students that cut up in class. Sometimes we have to send them out, work on them a little bit, try to get them to see their no. The way I generally work with it is to try to get them to see that this is not high school any longer. And sometimes it takes a little bit of embarrassing them in front of the rest of the class, and then they'll usually fall in line with it. And they get it. I've never given up on any of my students, so I always know it's just a coming in usually at the first of the semester, and they're thinking, yeah, I'm gonna treat this just like I did in 11th grade, and they come to find out all of a sudden it just doesn't work that way because you're paying to be there. You don't have to be in the classroom. Uh, so 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 yeah. So think about this. So my rights as a professor are your obligations, and your rights are my obligation. They're not personalized. It's not personal. It's still structural, right? So what is our role again? And this is one reason why students don't like sociology that much, because we're always seen as not being sort of individualistic or very original in some sense, but we tend to be conformists. We conform our behavior to our within these social structures we exist in, like the family, for example. So, in order to get along, in order to reach our goals together, we have to conform our behavior. So, in this scenario, my rights are your obligation. Your rights are my obligation. So, my rights would be that I expect my students to come to class on time. I expect them uh, to be aware and to listen to what I'm saying during the lecture time. Um, they're not making any noise or talking in the class. That's an obligation of the students towards me. Uh, students are my rights are to expect students to study outside of the classroom and to do their readings. I also uh, a right is to expect students to, if you're having problems, to come to my, you know, to contact me and come to my office hours so I can help you with things, whatever's on your mind. That's another. Uh, and also, it's my right that students really try their best to study for their exams, to be there for their exams, these kinds of things. And those rights of mine are in your status as a student. Uh, you need to conform to is you're obligated to that, right? So we're aware of each other's rights and obligations, whether we know each other or not, right? I used to teach in Detroit, Michigan. I taught in Detroit for about 4 years. Didn't live there. I lived in a different part of the state. I lived in Mount Pleasant, Michigan, and I worked for Central Michigan University. But I was a weekend professor, teacher, instructor, and I taught down in the city of Detroit, around in the suburbs, all around the city. And I would go on a Friday night and I'd teach Friday night, stay there in the hotel and teach all day Saturday. And we would, it was very short formatted, very large classes, mostly adults from the auto industries. And we didn't really have a lot of time to get to know each other. It was only a 4 weekend. So in 4 weekends, we did what you guys are doing for a whole semester. And so it was short formatted courses over a 4 weekend period. And students took it was an 8 week session, and they would have two classes, alternating weekends, and worked out pretty well. But we didn't really get to know each other, but we could do the class anyway, just by following our conforming to our what we know are our rights and obligations in the classroom. So for students, your rights would be for students is that I come to class also, that I try to be there as much as possible, unless other contingencies arise. Uh, that you have a right that I uh, do my best to try to explain what we're studying, to give you insights into concepts and the theories. Uh, Also, you have the right for me to try to stay on topic. You see this like sometimes where professors have you got 4 books, 3 books, and that they spend the whole time talking about fishing, or read chapter 3 and I'll see you next time. So that kind of goes against students' rights. Now here's a big one, but don't pull this one on your other professor. But one of your rights would be also in terms of the kinds of exams the professor gives you. So if a professor says on the syllabus that they're giving you they're going to give you all multiple choice true false exams. And then come exam time, you walk in and you're handed about 10 essay questions. And so you sort of without any of your foreknowledge, that would be going against your rights as a student to be informed about what kind of exams you're going to need to study for, right? So that would be a problem. Um, so, and you also have a right to my time, uh, and during office hours. Of course, I'm available all the time anyway. Unless I'm busy doing something else, but by usually talking after class, before class, after class. I enjoyed that. I enjoy that. Um, and so that's your rights. And that's my obligation to you as your instructor. So you see that this is just it's been structured into the social structure that these two statuses are very, very common. So that any classroom you enter into the United States, right, or anywhere in the world, basically. When I spent some time at Oxford University, uh, and I was there as a residency. It was a residency where I was able to do a little bit of well, basically it was seminars every day that I was going to, and I actually lived on the campus. And guess what? The name of the Oxford's made up of different colleges, and I thought it was ironic because the college that I stayed at was Pembroke. Yes, I stayed at Pembroke College, Oxford University, London, England. Not London, listen to me. It's getting late at night. Oxford, England. And though I did stay in London too for a while, um, got to stay in the old 15th century dorms. Then for our lunch, breakfast, lunch, and dinner was in what was called the Great Hall, and it's made just like a Harry Potter movie took their idea for the Great Hall from Oxford. Right across the street is Christ Church, and a lot of the movie was filmed. Not a lot of it, but there's quite a few scenes that were filmed at Christ Church College, right across the street from Pembroke there, and so that was very interesting experience. Uh, but even there, the classroom would be familiar to you and to me because it's still set up between that teacher and student, and the expectations tend to be very similar, right? The rights and obligations are the same. So as a human being, you would feel pretty much comfortable in any college anywhere basically in the world. The same kinds of things are going on, regardless of the subject matter or what country it's in. So that's how society's patterned through, because it's not just social structures are not just dealing with the classroom. They're also when you leave the classroom, you're going home to let's say you're an older student, and you've got a husband or a wife and two kids at home. Well, that's another social structure in society. The rights and obligations, the roles played in the social status between male and female in our culture has already been established. So what it is that we're kind of pre-socialized as we watch romance movies and how couples behave, through the media and our own families growing up, so that by the time we marry, we step again, we're stepping into that status once married. That's a pretty big status. And then we have to play out those roles of husband and wife. Of course, we're not very well socialized about keeping those relationships strong, and so in our culture we have some conflicts, and especially today. It used to be strongly adhered in terms of our religious beliefs. It was really looked down to get divorced, and the people were expected to stick it out. And nowadays, relationships, maybe because of the heavy commercialization of society, has become more and more sort of a throwaway relationships where we grab one person, marrying. Once you don't like each other too much, or you're not getting along, you fall apart. So that we have one of the highest. We have a very high divorce rate, almost 50%, or not quite, but it's almost one out of every two marriages in a divorce, and and that's because of some of the issues with the social structure of the family has been affected by other institutions in society. Um, so the classroom then can get done. The classroom can get done because we're conforming to the uh, the role requirements, the norms that are attached to those statuses. And it makes, here's another thing to think about with social structure. It makes social life predictable, and human beings like predictability. And in large modern or postmodern societies where we're dealing with strangers on a daily basis, these social structures help to make life predictable, so that you don't have to really know the professor. You just have to know what is a professor's job about, what are the rights and obligations of a professor. That's what we have to know, and then we know what it is that we have to do to relate. If a cop stops you while you're going home, then we don't know that person 9 times out of 10, but we do know the social status, and we know that sort of things we need to do to make the officer, when they come to our car window, we know that we should be not grabbing under the seat, or you know we're expected to be respectful, yes officer, no officer. I usually put my hands up on the wheel. I've already got my billfold and license laid out, so I'm not having to reach down in the car, you know, giving it to them. Now, so when the officers, that's a social structure. The officer has his rights and obligations, but the citizen also, and so that the norms governing that interaction is already built into the culture, if you will, of the police force. Now, let's say all that said, I'm going to finish up with this. All that said, we can still have degrees of freedom of behavior within those social structures. Uh, that policeman that stops us, we're banking on our predictability, right? We're predicting that if I do what I'm supposed to do, that police officer is going to treat me with respect, and we're going to be able to, you know, do this interaction and then be able to leave and go on our merry way. But maybe for whatever reasons, maybe the officer might be in a bad mood that day, or maybe the driver might not be in maybe things that just happened in their lives that's very disturbing. So things don't work out that well. Personality differences. People that are very laid back are probably going to be very, you know, very humble and getting along with some. There's also, in terms of personality, there's what we call people that are A personality. A personality people tend to be more assertive. So now most of us are made up a little bit of both. Excuse me, both a little bit of A personality in some contexts and B personality in others. Then you got the extremes. People that are so B personality that the house could be on fire and they would still be having a conversation with someone. Then you might have an extreme A personality where usually they don't like to stand, for example, at a grocery store in line. If there's a line of people, they really aren't patient about having to stand there and wait on, especially if people in front of you are talking with the checkout person. I've seen that happen where people behind them get, hey, come on, hurry up. So A personality folks can fly off the handle much more easily. So that could be a mixture of things that can interrupt the flow of interaction in a social structure. Same thing with students as well. Same thing. Same thing with professors. We had this, and I'll end this right now. But for professors and for other occupations as well, we can play our roles so tightly that we may come off as cold and rigid, right? So they always start the class, they always start at that very second that it's time to start. I used to have a professor like that myself, and they leave right at the last second, right? And they don't joke around much. They get down to business. So there's one thing we can do in our both as a student as well as professors and in many other occupations. We call it role distance. I don't think it's out there. One way we can be more to humanize. See, in these statuses, we can try to humanize their statuses. We really want to bring in some of our personality, so to speak. So one way that could be done is that some professors may, I'm guilty of it myself, is probably will come to class kind of dressed informal, like I am now. I don't usually wear t-shirts, but I do dress informal during the year. Uh, Also, I tend to uh, do some role distancing. And what I'm saying, I'm distancing myself from my role itself to let students see other parts of my life. So point out these maybe for you uninteresting objects, and I'm doing that intentionally to say, hey, I'm just a human being I'm first, and I also have my own likes and dislikes. So I can back away from my status and be more, I think, available to students to talk on about other things in life besides just what's going on in the classroom. And however, when we and vice versa with students as well. But if we step back too far, right? If we step back too far, then we may be crossing a line where we're becoming deviant in our job description, if you will. So that if you go too far with it, then maybe you're no longer teaching the class. Maybe every day you're just talking about what you did for the weekend or this kind of thing, Or students that were, the professor opens up to the students a little, and then the students sort of take advantage of that and think, oh, he's not tough about anything. We can do whatever we want, kind of deal. So that's when we're going too far, So we learn, we judge, we negotiate. Going back to symbolic interactionism, what we can do together, and we bring in doing so we humanize social structures. Again, we're not robots. Um, though society does really have a powerful impact on shaping our daily behaviors and we conform. Why do we conform? The question you have is why do people conform to these expectations? Well, most human beings want to put their best foot forward. Not all the time, but most of the time we're trying to put our best foot forward in these situations like being in class. Why? Because we have certain self-interests. And there's some theoretical models that we're not at yet. So, but there will be some coming up that will go into this more deeply. But for now, I'm gonna check out, and I'll see you guys at the beginning of the week. If you got any questions about any concepts, look at my office hours on, and for next week, if you want to make an appointment. To chat with me, and we have a live chat on the website, so we can meet there. And if it's not sometimes if it's something that's going to take us a little while a little complex we need to work on, then a lot of times I'll ask you for your phone number, then I'll call you and talk. Sometimes that's better. But if it's over some concept you're confused about or something that we can work on through chatting. We'll do it that way. But the main thing is to let me know early. I ask all of my students, what class you're in, what day of my office hours, Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, what day you want and what time you want me to be there, and so I can keep a schedule, and so we don't, so I don't get conflicts with other classes and other times. So keep that in mind, and so I'll talk to you guys first of next week, and we'll start with chapter 3. Just a little, you may have seen on the syllabus, we don't really have a lot of readings to do next week. It's because of the exam. It's going to be coming up, so I want to kind of keep that chapter a little bit open, give you some more time to start studying those first 3 chapters, I think it is. I might need to look at my syllabus. Don't repeat me on that. I don't think it's maybe it is the. I think it's chapters 1, 2, 3. Usually that's the case. I don't think I said chapter 4, but I'll check. Yeah, I'll send you a message about it. You'll see it. But anyway, so I'll let you guys go, and you guys have a great rest of your weekend. And I'll see you on. All right.